everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are actually doing a viewer requested topic. It has been a really long time since we have discussed something pet play related on this channel, and so I thought what we could look at is something a little bit unusual, something a little bit niche that not a lot of people even realize is a possibility, and that would be dominant pets. That is, when you do pet play, but the dom is the pet, which again is just something that not a lot of people even understand can happen. So before we get into how you actually do that and what it looks like, all of that stuff, I first want to establish a working definition, because when you go online, there's a very restrictive definition that a lot of people will use to define pet play. It'll be something like, pet play is when the submissive takes on the role of a pet in a power exchange relationship. And that works for some people, but I find it's very exclusive in a lot of ways. People that do solo pet play, people that do pet play in groups, switches that do pet play that happens outside of a power exchange dynamic. Like, there's a lot of types of pet play that don't fit that, including what we're going to be talking about here today. The definition that I prefer to use instead, that I've sort of been working on over the years, is that pet play is a type of role play that happens in a BDSM context where one or more of the participants takes on the role of a pet. And this could be anything. This could be a cat, a dog, a cow, a house bunny, a phoenix, a pet mermaid. It doesn't really matter what the animal is, so long as the headspace, the intention behind it, is to be a pet, to have the headspace of being a pet. And that for me is really what separates it from, for example, animal role play, because animal role play is just role playing as any old type of animal, and the thing that separates those two is, are they a pet or are they just being a wild animal? Are they being something else? So that's the part of it that's important to me, not the power exchange, the submission, etc. And I think the confusion here really comes from the fact that we do generally perceive pets as submissive, because of course through the process of domestication there is going to be a level of subservience to humans that happens. And I think what this does is it really creates a sort of natural hierarchy in our heads, the same way that we might have with, for example, caregivers and littles or masters and slaves. But keep in mind, just because something is stereotypically supposed to be one way doesn't mean it always looks like that. One of my favorite examples of this is in CGL, when you have the capital P dominant princess that has a lowercase d daddy, and this princess is just absolutely showered in affection. She is just absolutely spoiled. This daddy would do anything for her, and this princess really has this daddy completely wrapped around her finger. And along those same lines, I think you can really do this also with pets. For example, with a very regal kitten, right? Because cats can be very high and mighty, they can be very haughty, and maybe every once in a while this cat comes down from on high to bless these silly little humans with her presence, and the humans worship her with grooming and giving her her favorite food and toys, and then when she's done with everything, she simply goes back into her retreat until she's ready for the humans to be at her beck and call again. And actually, even though this is an example maybe from a pet play relationship, this isn't really that far off from a lot of the ways that actual humans treat their biological animals, which is just simply another inspiration that we can draw from. And I think it's important to keep in mind that just because something is unconventional doesn't mean that it's impossible. We can look at these natural hierarchies and use them as inspiration for our relationships, but we don't have to have it just go in that one direction. We can really create whatever we want, because BDSM allows us this really wonderful opportunity to play with convention, play with stereotypes, and if we want to, completely flip them on their heads. And on that note, there's certainly more than one way to approach dominance when it comes to a pet play framework. You don't always need a human-pet dynamic pairing, for example. You can totally have this be between two pets. Some really quick examples that come to mind would be a natural social hierarchy that may exist between pet dogs in the same household, or something that's maybe a little bit more biologically informed, like a house cat with the pet parakeet. One really prevalent example of this would be known as alpha and beta roleplay, which is in particular common in the gay men's puppy play community, where you do have multiple puppies that are playing together, but one of them is naturally the alpha, the dominant one, and the other ones are beta or omega that have to follow the lead of the alpha. Now, of course, I can't get too much farther without mentioning that the actual study where this whole alpha, beta, omega idea came from has long since been debunked, but it's a nice little idea. People like it as inspiration, and hey, you're not writing a biology paper here. You don't have to go over exactly what biological reality is, and if you want to, you could totally have a parakeet that's actually dominant over the household kitten. And this is kind of skirting the line between pet play and animal role play, but I think another good example of how to do this would be with something called predator and prey, which is its whole own complicated thing. So just as a quick summary, basically what it is it's where you do a type of role play in a BDSM scene or in a dynamic where one person takes on the role of a prey animal, the other person takes on the role of a predator. This could be in domesticated animals, maybe between a pet fox and a chicken, or with a house cat and a mouse. You can also mix domestic animals with wild animals, so maybe, for example, a dog going after a wild rabbit, or a coyote going after a household bunny. This can go into a lot of different areas, from takedown and capture, rough body play, wrestling, CNC, biting, claws, sensation play, tons of stuff. And again, that's just sort of a brief overview of some of the dynamics that can be involved there, but I'm sure at some point in the future I will talk about predator and prey in full on its own. Now, for my own experience with dominant pets, I haven't had a relationship where this has been the case, but I was very lucky in the BDSM scene that I came up in. We had a lot of very diverse people that had so many interesting, very unique dynamics. And there's actually two people that I knew from very, very early on in my kink journey that had something of a dominant pet dynamic. I knew one couple where the dominant was a dragon and they had a pet fox. There was lots of bondage and fire play involved, if you can imagine that. I also knew somebody that was a wolf that had a domestic pet puppy as a submissive. Now again, those are sort of skirting the line between animal role play and pet play, but those are the closest analogs that I have as examples, just to show that it's sort of possible to do, and at least a dominant can also take on an animal role. Now, as far as from what I could observe, what would typically happen is it wouldn't be like the dominant would be in like full on like animal pet headspace with their submissive partner, because frankly, you do kind of need somebody that can steer the bus a little bit during a scene, because if both people are like really deep in headspace, it's very hard to know when to stop and to remember safe words and things. So what I would see happen is it would be almost like a flavor to the relationship and the scenes in terms of how they would communicate with each other and title use, and occasionally they would have scenes where they would go into more sort of a full-on animal role play type of headspace together, rather than kind of one of them being more in charge, more in their human frame of mind. But of course, this isn't actually all that unusual, despite what things like TikTok or Instagram would have you believe. Most people don't go around being their pet self 24/7. Most of us don't have lives where we can get away with doing that, but having just a little bit of pet play, a little bit of animal role play in there, I think can definitely be enough to really have that flavor to a relationship dynamic. But if you want to go outside of a relationship dynamic, if you just want to have this be a sort of scene by scene thing, not a relationship, some things that I think would be really good to look at would be things like rough body play or takedown and capture play, which I have mentioned previously in this video, because it allows you to be very raw and real and in the moment, and because you don't have to have tools to say pull somebody's hair or bite somebody, I think that can really facilitate a dominant also being able to be in the animal headspace versus, very traditional dominant tools like using a flogger or rope bondage, things like that. That's definitely, potentially at least, going to detract from one's ability to be in that pet frame of mind while also taking on the dominant role. I also think things like using animalistic vocalizations or body language that goes with the type of animal or pet that you're trying to role play can also work really, really well, not only for you getting into your headspace, but also to communicate with your partner sort of where you're at in terms of how deep your headspace is, and so they know how to respond to you in the appropriate fashion, especially if you're doing this dominant pet play as in addition to other dynamics that you might already have in the relationship. And if you're looking to go in a softer direction, I actually think things like sensation play are really underestimated when it comes to most types of kink, to be honest. People really overlook sensation play, but you have to remember, animals are really tactile beings. They experience the world through sight and smell and touch and taste in a way that humans don't always necessarily do in the same degree or fashion. So things that have a really strong, pungent smell, things that have a very particular texture, maybe like feathers, for example, or maybe a bit of rabbit fur, those can also really help you get into the headspace and do a scene where you're both able to go into that pet frame of mind together. If you're looking for something that is more rules-based for a 24/7 dynamic, what comes to mind for me are things like maybe the dominant has to be the first one to enter into a room as sort of like alpha posturing. Maybe the dominant gets to eat first, or the submissive has to wait to eat until they're finished eating. Maybe the dominant gets dibs on all of the good furniture in the house, and the submissive has to wait for their permission to enter the room, or they get the second choice pillows or have to sit on the floor. Now, really with all of this though, with any kind of rules, I just want to always emphasize intention is what matters here. And I think it's really worth mentioning that when it comes to rules, intention is the thing that matters, maybe more so than the literal rules as they are written. You can really have anything be a rule, and if you have it with the intent that this is meant to facilitate headspace, remind you of your place in the dynamic, as long as you have that right energy going into things and maintain that as you're doing it on a daily basis, that I think is the most important ingredient, rather than simply relying on the literal exact rules really closely replicating a certain behavior that reminds you of a certain animal species, for example. And with that, I think that is all of the advice that I have for today. I know this is a really sort of niche area of kink, and so I think it's important to remember that the farther you go into these niche areas of BDSM, the harder it is to find a guidebook on how exactly to do that thing ahead of time, right? If you're just looking at a standard DS relationship, a submissive pet relationship, there's so many books and articles and YouTube videos and classes and FetLife groups and tons of information on how exactly to do that thing before you actually do that thing. And I know it's really tempting, it's really scary, right, to go into something totally new, completely blind. And so hopefully I have at least offered you the opportunity to kind of discover maybe what intrigues you, maybe what you want to learn more about, but I can't really give you a guide on how exactly to do that thing. And I think if you can be willing to get dirty and make mistakes and put the time in, that is really where you're going to be able to make a dynamic that is completely unique and tailored to you and your partners, and that is simply the best thing there is in BDSM. But if you guys have any comments, questions, anything you want to share down below, please do, especially if you are somebody that does actually have a dominant pet relationship. I would love to hear more about what that looks like for you. So if you want to share any stories, any experience, any wisdom that you have, please leave a comment down in the comment section below. And if you really enjoyed this, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week about all sorts of kink and BDSM related topics. And finally, if you really enjoyed this, the best way to support my channel is through Patreon. That is what makes this video possible. It also allows me to offer you guys a bunch of extra exclusive perks and rewards, like friending me on FetLife, being part of our Discord chat. We are currently trying to make our way to 1,000 patrons, and when that happens, I have a bunch of awesome ideas for new sorts of materials I want to make, new content. If you haven't already, please go ahead and check that out. A link will be down below. If you already support me over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.